All right. Wow. Really glad to see so many folks here tonight who watched the debate and now participating in this discussion. I'm David Cash. I'm the Dean of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies, one of the co-sponsors of the debate tonight. And great to see the fantastic work of the whole team at McCormick who helped put this together. Rochelle, who is behind the scenes right now, and Jack and Sarah, I see. Liz and Chris were helpful as well. And I see Associate Dean Kiki Adozi. Great to see you here tonight. And it's not his name on here, but Bob Turner, who has been the critical player in our relationship with WBUR and the Globe, and worked on the questions with the editorial board tonight, and worked on getting the students. You saw two of our students featured tonight. So Bob, just fantastic work that you've done with these debates. Bob's been working with the team here for 3+ years. We've put together over 15 debates. And so it's just been an extraordinary time. And this was yet another one. And it's hard not to think that what happened tonight will make a difference in the polls in the next 2 weeks. So thanks to the whole team, the whole McCormick team for this. And it's fantastic to see faculty, students, and staff here on the call tonight. Many of whom contributed potential questions that were asked tonight, so thanks very much. I want to introduce Professor Christine Brenner from the Public Policy Department. She's going to moderate the conversation tonight amongst all of us. I already saw there were a couple of questions on the chat, but this is not just for questions, but this is for commentary. All of you just sat through an hour of a back and forth that I hope was illuminating, and so we're really interested in your perspectives as well. So let me just make sure with Rochelle Straker that I've gotten everything okay now before we hand it over to Christine. Rochelle, are we all good? I'm getting a note that yes, I just need to be louder, and that's people rarely say I need to be louder. So okay, I'll work on that. All right, Professor Brenner, take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Cash. This has been an exciting evening and a very intense evening. I think that we saw in the back and forth between the two candidates that policy issues were central, but they are frustrated and they are not happy with the tone in the campaign, and they don't see a clear way out of that at this point in time that they can both agree on. So I think what we want to do in the next hour is probe some of the policy issues that they brought up, talk about the frustrations that not only they are experiencing in the campaign, but that you experienced as an audience in listening to the conversation. So what I'm going to do is read the question from the participant that you have entered. And I think one thing that happened during the debate was we were so caught up in listening to it, and it was so rapid pace, you probably haven't had time to think about a question. So maybe as we begin the conversation, I encourage you to put a question in the chat, which will get relayed to me, and we can broaden the conversation. I will initially respond to the questioner, and then what you'll need to do is raise your hand, either on the screen or there's a little green chat down when you're in, where is it? It's in participants.
Yeah, where it says participants.
At the bottom of the screen where it says participants, if you click on that, you'll see there's a box that says raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, then Rochelle will keep track of the order in which you want to speak, and she'll be sending that to me, and I'll call on you and you can get into the conversation. Okay, so that's kind of how we're going to run the next hour, and I hope we will have a lot of interesting questions to discuss. So without further ado, Claire Wickerson is asking, how do we get politicians to move the needle on critical issues as opposed to spending the majority of the time attacking each other's past actions and character. I can see you were frustrated too, Claire, just like the two members who are running in this election. And I think it's hard when a campaign turns negative, as this one has recently. It's easier to take pot shots at personal characteristics, family background, or if you've been in office for a lengthy period of time and you have a long legislative history, to look at voting patterns that are 2 decades ago, when a politician may have actually evolved quite a bit in their perspective from then. So how do we get beyond that? I think one way we get beyond it is we as voters have to push them on issues. And how do you push people on issues? You can do it through letters to the editor. You can do it tonight in the narrative that we'll be capturing and be able to share with them afterwards. And I think you do it in any kind of interaction that you have with candidates, either online or unusually in person. Focus on the issue that is important to you. So would anyone else like to add to that? Kiki?
Yeah, hi, and thank you for the question. And thanks for your analysis, Kristen. But I have a different view on the, I guess bickering, I think there were, in an hour, maybe 2 or 3 occasions where they really sparred. But all in all, I think, we were able to get an exchange on the issues. In terms of the bickering, though, I think at the heart of this debate is the question, the boogeyman question. Why is Kennedy challenging, a fellow Democrat, in, an era of coronavirus and, Trump? Shouldn't he have just, sort of waited his turn? But I think, the point that he was trying to make is, primaries, is a part of our democracy. He challenged, the senator, the incumbent senator, on questions of style, of leadership and, especially substance of leadership. The senator, claimed to be the kind of senator that would do, all the things that he should have been doing for the past 44 years. And Kennedy comes in and says, let's get beyond rhetoric, let's get beyond, tropes, and let's talk about sort of meaningful, justice. And he's making a claim to do things differently. So I think that we want to be patient with democracy. We don't want to allow our democracy to be sort of encaptured by politicians who claim incumbency and therefore they shouldn't be challenged. That's not democracy. And sometimes when brothers are challenging each other around critical ideas, it does, in order to distinguish themselves, get a little testy.
I think that's true. Nural, you've had your hand up for a bit. Please unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Oh, thank you very much, Christine. I was kind of disappointed on both of them when the reporters asked them on 2 areas, which is hypocrisy in both cases. One is negativity in the campaigns against each other, which is against their own values. Second is that they also talked about super PAC, but they both joined the super PAC. And instead of direct answer to that, they're just blaming each other like 5-year-olds. So I didn't see big difference between Donald Trump's rhetoric and their rhetoric. So, but I am seeing it that was not really honest politician's response. So neither of them deserve my votes. So that's my point.
Claire, this was your question originally. If you'll unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So this is why I'm in gerontology and not. I was getting riled up. I poured myself some wine, but box because I am a student still. But I just feel like, okay. I just feel like we're wasting so much time just like bullshitting, like, and not just like answering any of the actual questions or like brainstorming, like, what are we gonna do about just any different issue? Like, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, this wasn't really like a certain point, but I agree with what everybody else said. So.
Well, and I think the point that you make, Claire, and you also bring up, Neural, is that you wanted more meat. You wanted more discussion about issues. And what we ended up getting was lists of things that this person has done Green New Deal and this person has introduced other kinds of legislation. And for people who are not familiar with them as candidates, they need to know that information. What kinds of legislation have they stood behind? But I think that the way the questions were set up this evening, that the host and the moderators set up, moved the debate into some of the arena that got into the negativity and was less policy focused. And that's always a difficult decision for TV personalities to make, because we have been reading a lot in the Globe and seeing on channel WBUR about how there has been this negative turn in the race. And yet when we go to vote, we hopefully are making our decisions based on the policy positions of those who are there. Who else would like to jump in on this? Bob?
How about that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Christine. And hello, everybody. I'm Bob Turner. I'm using my wife's computer. That's why. Aha, thank you. Magic.
Your name.
Rochelle, is that you? You're fantastic. Somebody. Anyway, just on this last point, I think it takes some probing, and it's hard in that, you know, we spend a lot of effort focusing in campaigns on debates, and I think that the presidential debates may really be interesting. That's another subject. But I think in this case, I detected at least one thing that I thought was new. I haven't listened to every word these guys have said, but they both fairly recently have taken the position that they're against prison sentences of life without the possibility of parole, because there ought to be some hope for redemption and long sentences and everything. But then they were asked about, so that's been on the record, but they were asked about Tsarnaev, and as I heard it, Markey said, well, maybe we'll make an exception for him. In other words, keep him locked up or maybe give him the death penalty. And Kennedy, who of course didn't avoid the references to his own family's tragic shootings, but he said he thought a lot about it, and he thought that he would stick with his policy, which I took to mean that he would not have Tsarnaev have the life without parole sentence. So, but it takes a little while to dig enough to get a difference. I thought that was a little piece of news, not earth-shaking, but pretty interesting.
Those are really good differences to bring out there. David Peel would like to join the conversation. David, do you want to expand on what Bob has talked about with criminal justice, or did you want to introduce?
Well, maybe I should wait.
No, go right ahead.
Well, thanks. First of all, I knew the woman who was the landlady of the Tsarnaevs on Norfolk Street in Cambridge. She was a sweet lady. She passed a while ago. I kind of don't think we show how killing is wrong by killing people, and I don't trust the state to do that for us. There's always an individual who has to pull the switch, and we should think about what it does to that person as well. But I wanted to ask, and I don't know if it's already been talked about because I've been in and out the volume. I had a hard time with the volume.
Okay, just go ahead.
One of the decisive issues for me in trying to make up my mind between these two candidates, and I haven't yet, although a lot of people I know have been endorsing Ed, and I've met both of them, is their position on Israel and Palestine. And coupled with that, the influence of what's been called by people like Steve Wald at Harvard, the Israel lobby, more specifically, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, APAC, who are seen to be maybe a little less influential now than they used to be. But I would have liked, I don't know that they spoke to that tonight. Does anybody have any insight on where these, it seems to be very difficult for people who get elected in this country to sort of stand up to the Israel lobby on this really important question. Maybe other people participating have some insight into where these two candidates are on that, and how we might be able to change the environment in which people assess those policies in the light of fairness and human rights.
David, this is an important issue that you bring up, and certainly America has positioned itself over the years as a friend to Israel. And tonight during the debate, this topic was not introduced at all. So there may be some in the audience who know about specific positions that either Markey or Kennedy hold, and if so, I'd like you to share that. But what I will say is that this recent agreement that seems to be moving forward between Israel and the UAE will allow for an opportunity for questions to be raised to the candidates. And so as we see changes in in foreign affairs and a new development comes forward, it allows for us as citizens as well as reporters to bring these issues up and bring it to the fore. Would there be anyone who is in the conversation tonight who is aware of positions that they know that Markey or Kennedy have stated on the Israel-Palestine situation? Okay, I don't see any hands at this point. And so what I would just say is let's follow the conversation on WBUR and in the Boston Globe and see if we can encourage conversation around this, specifically looking at in the context of this new agreement between Israel and UAE. And I think the other issue that I hear you bringing up, David, is an issue of fairness and of recognition and not being marginalized. And I think around those issues, these candidates have very firm opinions in which they are really for the underdogs. I think we heard that in both conversations tonight from Markey as well as from Kennedy, caring about what's being said around the table in the working class family, caring about the choices that are being made in relation to education for children and what can they do if they don't have childcare and how can they go back to work and all of those kinds of issues.
If I may I
Yes,
follow up on something
absolutely.
you just said, which I think my reaction is it's easy for people to talk about fairness, and what really matters is what people actually do about it and how they interact with the constituents that they are there to, hopefully to serve. The one thing that does strike me about the debate was when there was the ongoing back and forth about, who's taking money from who and who's declaring who's financing each they apparently each have a super PAC, was when Joe brought up Uber contributions from, and to me, what I reacted to was less the allegation that a known misogynist, but Uber itself. And I wonder if anybody has any reaction to learning. I don't know how much money it is, but learning that Senator Markey has apparently gotten this I would presume a significant contribution from the former CEO of Uber. But I'm not a big fan of Uber, being a big supporter of public transit. And Uber's business model is apparently based on putting public transit out of business. So does anyone have any comment on that, perhaps?
Nural, did you have something you wanted to add? Make sure you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I like to add something here. What bothers me the most is that these guys are from privileged society, high income, high wealth. They're born into, and they have been doing this politics in the name of fairness and equity for a very long time. But their record doesn't show anything that they have done for them. But every time when the debate comes, very common question comes to the fore, then they said, we have to do a better job. But did they really do any job at all? They did not. And when we see the super PAC putting money into their pockets, campaign pockets, that's the biggest hypocrisy I see in them. And that's the difference between them and the super PAC team of the Republican Party. They're on the same boat. That's my comment. Thank you.
Kiki, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, not on the Israeli question, but on the, I think, hot button, policy questions that they did address. And I think we can see some distinguishing, elements in how each would approach the problems. Okay, lots was talked about in terms of race relations. Lots was talked about in terms of defunding, the whole new sort of defunding and police reform policies. And lots was talked about coronavirus and the public health crisis and how each would approach, this crisis. We know that Kennedy is in support of Medicare for all, and Markey is in support of, Obamacare Plus. We know that Kennedy and Markey are both champions, absolutely, for communities of color. However, I do think that Kennedy has made himself a distinguishing factor in being, the change that he wants to advance by, collaborating with those communities, engaging them, across, the state in ways that he is challenging Markey for not having done. And so on the questions of, race relations as well, especially the sort of George Floyd, I agree with you, Nuru, that they're both, especially Kennedy, there's lots of talk about Kennedy being, a trust fund baby, however, I do think he is not struggling, but persuasively showing that, okay, yeah, that is my legacy, and I'm proud of it, however, I distinguish myself from that legacy by not just being born with a spoon in my mouth, but earning, the public service that my family and certainly I want to position myself. I think he is the more progressive candidate, vis-a-vis Markey, but yeah, that's my observation.
Well, thank you very much. Nurul, one more comment, and then I want to go to a question that Carlos Aguilera is asking. You need to unmute yourself, Nurul.
Thank you. I just to respond to Rita on her comment on them, both of them. I think Kennedy failed completely in the debate on the policy issues. He didn't have that much upper hand in the policy because he didn't have that experience. But I think Markey has a lot of good things about the policy. He put it up there, and he did a better job in that perspective, I think. But we do not really know how sincere he is, what he says on the debate, and what record shows in there. That's a big difference. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to go to a different question now. Carlos has been waiting very patiently. Carlos Aguilera asks us, what could be the supports that each candidate could give to the Democratic Party in the presidential race? So we were completely focused on a senatorial primary here, but what Carlos, I think, is challenging us to think about is whoever wins the primary, how will they help the Harris and Biden team? Carlos, do you have some thoughts on that you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you. I mean, who could be more decisive with their support for the party, and what does each candidate contribute to Democratic presidential candidacy? I understand the focus of this debate, but I am in Colombia. In this moment, in this country, we see the presidential election in the United States, and I think this will be interesting for the region.
I think that's an important point, Carlos, and I think that in the Democratic Party, there are primaries to try and get a local candidate, but the overarching goal of the Democratic Party, and which we're seeing reflected in the Democratic National Convention that started last night and will be going on for the next 3 days, is how do we move Trump out of the White House? That is the primary goal. If you tuned into the debate last night, every speaker talked about, including a number of Republicans who were people with public personas like John Kasich, the former governor of Ohio, saying that I'm not going there with Trump. I am going to vote for Joe Biden. And so when our conversation is over this evening, I'm hoping that you will take a break, refresh yourself, and tune in the Democratic Convention this evening. Tonight's keynote speaker is Dr. Jill Biden, who is the wife of the presidential candidate, Joe Biden. Kiki?
No, thank you for that, because I can't wait to transition from this to the second day of the Democratic Convention. And thank you for your question, though, Carlos, because, I think it's important. And I think it's part of the distinctions between the two candidates that maybe we missed because it's very nuanced. There are, the Democratic Party and its convention is promoting the idea of unity, unity of the country. And you're absolutely right, Kristen. That includes, several Republicans who, feel that for this 2020 election, they'll vote Democrat. But on the other side, there is, a strong progressive force, behind, the Bernie Sanders movement, Elizabeth Warren, movement. This is very strong progressive force. In the candidature of Biden and Harris, they're both moderates. I think Ed Markey would be a moderate, and Kennedy would be on the progressive side. So either one of them that wins, what they will do is they will enhance, that part of the diverse Democratic sort of umbrella, tent, that is bringing people together in all its diversity, and they'll enhance that part of the, I think, national election. And I think that we should, see the distinctions between the two, as that. One more progressive, the other, a moderately progressive.
That's an important point, Kiki. And Sarah, I'll come to you in just a minute. I think that what we're seeing in Senator Markey is someone who, as a result of the national campaign, has been pulled more into the progressive arena and who has been a moderate, but is now listening to a lot of other voices. And I think his desire to couple with very progressive senators like Alexandria AOC on the Green New Deal demonstrates his willingness to affiliate with progressive causes. Sarah, you had a comment. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I definitely think that Kennedy is the more progressive. I mean, Markey is the more progressive over Kennedy, given his track record. I mean, he worked with AOC for the Green New Deal. He's done multiple highly progressive things. AOC has backed him over Kennedy. So I think that's an important distinction to make. I think Kennedy is much more moderate. He's not for Medicare for all. Markey is for Medicare for all. Kennedy is not. I think that's another important distinction that needs to be made. I don't know. Overall, I just think that Markey is far more progressive. I just wanted to say that.
So it's good that we have different perspectives on the candidates, and sometimes whether I think we frame a candidate as being progressive or not is those issues that are most important to us and their views on that. So I want to take just a minute now and run through some of the policy topics that were brought up this evening and see if people would like to make comments on them. We had a little bit of discussion on the criminal justice system, but let's talk about educational justice. And we had conversation from both Markey and from Kennedy related to the school to prison pipeline and how we can make things accessible during the COVID era. What response did you have to the positions that were offered either by Markey or by Kennedy in this arena? And if you'll just raise your hand, I'll call on you. And Rochelle, will you help me catch some people whose faces aren't on the screen right now? Neural, go ahead and add your comment.
Thank you. From that perspective, I think on the education side, I did not see neither of them had any contribution to be considered as concrete, nothing. I didn't see anything that could be a kick-ass momentum. They did not make that happen.
Do others agree with Neural that there weren't concrete things offered in relation to educational justice, or did you hear something else that might have been mentioned by some of the candidates?
No, I didn't hear anything concrete, nothing.
So I'm going to push back on that, Neural, and say that one thing I heard Markey talk about was the work that he has done on technology and broadband access and funding for Wi-Fi access, and the importance particularly in communities of color and communities of poverty, where these are not readily accessible things that children may have at home that they might need it during this time of remote schooling. Kiki, did you pick something else?
You know, I agree with you to some extent, Nuru. But there was the question of the international student, you know, question, right? You know, and I think both of them gave absolutely excellent, you know, answers and responses. But what I think stood out for me is that, you know, why hasn't the Senate, you know, responded? You know, and Markey is a senator, right? You know, and I think that's the point. It's nice to be able to say, I'll do this and I'll do that, and but what are you doing? You know, the Senate has an opportunity to have responded, you know, to Trump. This international student crisis is happening in real time, and the Senate has done nothing. And we can blame, you know, Mitch McConnell. But I'm not sure that I saw, you know, any Democratic senators, you know, lead the charge. I just think, again, on the questions, it's, you know, I'd like to see action, you know, put, you know, your policy where your feet are. And, you know, I didn't see a lot of that with Markey.
Betsy Doherty, did you have a comment you wanted to add? You need to unmute yourself.
Hi. No, I was just saying, commenting that when it came to the point of remote or not remote teaching, how evasive and how much time both Markey and Kennedy spent dancing around a direct answer. And with all of the hot topics, whether it was the justice system, remote or not remote, they don't want to polarize any of their supporters. So they think by dancing around the topic that they're going to be in a better position. And for me, just made me more frustrated with both of them. I was really disappointed that they couldn't take a stand. And the only edge I would give Kennedy was that, and I experience this now at work, is I have staff who have to choose between their children or their jobs. They don't know, it's not a black and white answer, but you still have to make a stand and you still have to say something. And I felt like neither of them said anything.
Bob?
Well, isn't that interesting? It's like eyewitnesses to a crime. I don't know if this was a crime. People have different stories. I thought they did a little dancing on that issue, but both of them ended up, I thought, saying it's up to the local community, and they would not buy on to the position some of the unions, not all, I believe, but some of the unions have taken, that everything should be remote for the start of the school year. And I thought both of them ended up saying that they would not agree to that. That's town by town, some towns might be able to.
And Bob, isn't that interesting? Because the teachers union is the union that has the highest turnout in voting for Democratic candidates. And so there was an opportunity for two Democrats tonight to make a positive statement and be influential in trying to win over the teachers union, and neither one of them chose to go there. I was very surprised by that.
Well, this is where I think that I'm going to blame the the questioners, right? For framing sort of critical questions, because it is a difficult question. But my question is, why don't we have the kind of leadership we have in New York, where it is the state, that sort of embarks upon a fair policy around these questions, because I think both candidates are right. You can support the union, but there are so many constituencies that they have spoken to, especially in essential worker communities, poor communities, who are struggling with what to do with their children, right? And so why don't we have at the state level phased in policy that provides resources around this question in ways that constituencies don't have to be divided against each other, and they're doing it in New York.
Well, and I think it's very interesting that you bring up New York as a comparison, Kiki, because there's been a lot of coverage lately, both on WBUR and in the Boston Globe, discussing how come we're getting different outcomes in these two states that are diverse and both have strong governors, but they've chosen different paths. And I think what we've seen in Governor Cuomo in New York State is someone who, from the beginning, when there was so much chaos in his state, simply said, all right, somebody's got to be in charge, and the person who needs to be in charge is the governor. Yeah. And, I think, he became a household word across the United States, especially for some of his early decisions. But what we've seen in Massachusetts is a moderate Republican governor who is himself a technocrat and who is not someone who would respond in the way Cuomo did. It's very different from his particular personality. What is common between the two governors, though, is that they are both committed to scientific evidence-based decision-making. We've seen greater transparency in New York from the beginning in how the data was being maintained at the state level. We had some problems in Massachusetts at the beginning that there was not as transparent reporting of the data, but we got there eventually. And so I think that we're just really seeing the difference between a mainline Democrat governor and a moderate Republican who in other parts of the country would probably be considered a conservative Democrat, but who is also a technocrat. And so they're stylistically are quite different there.
Christine, I'd like to make a quick comment.
Yes, and then Baby.
On the school opening, the questions from the reporters were very direct. They asked questions very directly, but I don't think neither of the candidates answered directly. They are like, passing up over, they're just avoiding the direct answer, talking about blah, 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 science and all this stuff, and flexibility that Markey said. But that is not a really firm answer as a candidate of the state senator.
And I think we also see that these are well-trained politicians, and politicians know that when they are asked a question, their goal is to turn it around in such a way that they can bring up the talking points they want to discuss. Baby, and you had something you wanted to add to the conversation.
Yes, unfortunately, I had to leave the debate for another meeting with the SPED PAC. So I'm a SPED PAC board member and very advocate for children with dyslexic.
Wonderful. I applaud your grassroots advocacy, and certainly a group of children who need advocacy.
Right. So, I mean, I wish that I will be reading it tomorrow, but I wish that I had the opportunity to listen to the questions. But based on the conversation you see that you guys are having, and that kind of really tear me apart because I'm still trying to figure out who to vote for. And that was that I was like, okay, this is my time to figure out the question, especially on the education piece. And the fact that they did not really answer clearly of what parents want to hear, and especially of the school reopening, looking at on base of this, which is great, but also looking at, we have a lot of parents that does their jobs. Now they have to be homeschool. And we have about 40% in different schools, and the BPS of out of 125 schools has definitely special kids with learning disability from, autism spectrums and so on. How can we be able to support those families? The plan for BPS is one thing, the BTU has another plan, but they are listening, they are watching what the parents are requesting or trying to hear from them. But I don't think that, both candidates are listening to what people are looking for, because it's a big risk to just send your babies to go to school when you don't feel safe that the numbers right in front of us is going up. But what is the support? And you mentioned that Markey said that, doing and giving internet to the communities. Over the summer for the spring, over 9,000 students didn't get logged in the school system, didn't have a computer, or if they give them the computer, they didn't have internet. I have parents reaching out to me day in and day out. They don't understand the school system. They don't understand what to do with their kids. They're in shelter. Some kids are in school in Boston, but they send them to Worcester because that's where the hotel is. How do you try to just help those families? So I'm trying to figure out, this is the prison to the pipeline. If we do not have the teachers equipped and to support the students and to help them to basic reading, which that's the best gift you can give a child, and that's their freedom. This is where you're gonna send them to the pipeline. That's not, there's not much creativity of other ways to say it. And what's the outcome is gonna go to it, where you're gonna be able to be, when you come to the Black and brown community in Boston, Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, most likely they are gonna be the victim from the police. This is where the pipeline is going to go through. It's whether you go to jail or you go 6 feet under. And let's be real. So I'm trying, I was very turned to see that they didn't really answer, to make parents like me or people who probably not parents, or give them that confidence that they have the teachers and the parents and the students back. That's all I want to share.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think children who have special needs need a higher level of interaction with trained professionals in order to have the opportunity to realize their full potential as individuals. And that's a very hard thing to do in an online environment. And so I think we are seeing in some school districts, they're not going to bring anybody back except they're going to bring the special needs children on campus so that they can get that one-on-one that they actually need to move forward in their individual education plans. And I saw Beverly nodding her head in agreement with a lot of what you are saying. David, I want to get to you in just a minute, but I think the other thing I would like to mention in this regard is it is the chief challenge in a federal system that decisions around education are not a federal decision. Decisions around education are state responsibilities and local governments as a portion of and defined by the state. So while we have a lot of great federal policies, in particular IDEA, which provides special funding for Title I students and for students who have the kind of learning differences that you were talking about, Fabian, that monies actually only represents between 4 to 10% of any local school district's budget. And so the vast majority of what's happening in education is a state issue. And that means that in a state where the state is not going to have a uniform policy, it becomes a local government issue. And some local governments will do a better job of addressing those issues or not. And it's why it's so important that you're involved at a grassroots level, advocating for students the way that you are, Fabian. And I really applaud you for that.
I'm sorry.
One comment, and then I want to let David have his say.
Agree on that one, but in the federal level, like with the working under IDEA law, there's a lot of the things that policies that they can change. So once they change those policies, that can come into the state and the local government. And that's something like for the past few years, I've been lobbying, going to DC on hot July, to go lobbying, to just talk to different senators to make sure that, they can change certain things in the IDEA. It took like 6 years to just say you can be to put dyslexia in an IEP in Massachusetts. And now we have like trying to change the IEP form. They asking parents to fill out, because the fact that, if you said you're Black or you're a single parent, that's a lack for you to just get resources, if you're not an IEP. So dyslexia is not new. Dyslexia is like, it's a lot of things that they can change in the IDEA. So I'm sure that, there's a lot of legwork they can try to work with the local and the state government and bring that to the federal level.
And what you're talking about, Fabian, really is the importance of us interacting with elected officials around policies that are important and personal in our lives and in our children's lives and in our communities' lives. And, you're really giving us a great example of grassroots activism, even by making the trip to DC and talking to them. And I think that for these various policy issues that we are individually passionate about, there's still time between now and September 1st. We have about 2 weeks. Pick up your pen or send an email to the candidates and tell them how you feel. And so, David, I know you've been waiting patiently. Please join the conversation, even if it's a different topic.
Would that be me?
Yes.
Well, thanks. I want to just interject a couple of observations. First of all, about public health. Public health departments and public health resources in this country have been gutted. I mean, I'm not a specialist in any of the areas that people are recently talking about, but I have been participating on a weekly basis in a webinar that's led by a former top public health official in Cook County, Chicago, Chicago area, which is a place that's been very hard hit in this pandemic. And so this is somebody who has a lot of experience and has pulled together a group of people across the country who have been focusing on reopening the schools in the last several weeks. The recommendation that's come out of the people who've been leading that webinar is that the schools should not reopen. I don't know enough about it to have a position, but I would emphasize the lack of public health resources, which would be essential to safely do a lot of things in a pandemic, like provide health care for people who need it, contact tracing that's not done primarily by computer, so that you can actually go out and find people and do the contact tracing that's believed to be extremely important in getting the virus under control. So I start by putting a lot of emphasis on the lack of public health resources. New York City, according to people in this sort of informal group, supposedly are one of the few places that actually still have a pretty robust public health infrastructure. And that may be, I don't know about New York State as a whole, but that may be part of why, if New York City, in spite of how awful it was there for a period of time, maybe have got a little bit stronger foundation in their recovery, may have something to do with their public health infrastructure. But I do also want to bring up about Cuomo, as impressive as he was, you know, sort of entertainment value of those press conferences early on. It was very disturbing to me when I learned that Cuomo had apparently signed off on a waiver of liability for nursing home owners in New York State. And so, you know, I mean, sometimes you have to look a little behind the curtain and take a, and sometimes it's hard to get that information.
David. And David, if you would let me jump in here.
Yeah, please do.
Because we're coming towards the end of the hour, I'd like to bring us focused back on Massachusetts and less on New York. And I am very appreciative of the fact that you bring up healthcare and healthcare justice.
The idea would be that in Massachusetts, where some of this thinking would be applicable is that if you were really looking at it from a public health perspective, you might not want to just split the difference between those communities where people are antsy to have their kids go back to school and those communities where there are a lot of people who are still worried about it. But you might really want to ground the decisions in a public health perspective. And if you don't have a robust public health infrastructure, you just may not be in a position to make those decisions in the ways that I think in Massachusetts we should, but probably we're not there yet, and we ought to include that in our thinking, how to build up the public health infrastructure.
I think that's a very important perspective, and we also know that the public health infrastructure is located primarily in the Boston area and less accessible in other parts of the state, which is problematic when you have communities like Lawrence and Lowell and Worcester and Springfield, where the needs of communities of poverty are just as great there as they are in Dorchester and Mattapan and Roxbury.
Right, and actually people, it's not just that they're just as great, but actually that there's a big disparity in the impact in those communities, as most people know, just tracking the data.
Absolutely. Would someone else like to join in on, as we finish up our conversation tonight, with any other perspective on the public health justice and as it relates to perhaps opening the schools? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone who wants to mention that. So I want to go over some of the major issues that we have talked on tonight that are policy issues. We've had really good conversation about the criminal justice system and the problems with the school to prison pipeline. And we heard some discussion by both of the candidates. There was conversation in which they were primarily in agreement about not having life without parole, Markey creating a separate category for terrorists that he would put Tsarnaev in, and Kennedy saying, no, he would treat Tsarnaev the same as anyone else to be considered in that regard. We've also had some great conversation about educational justice, and we've heard from people in the audience, Fabian and others who are doing a lot of grassroots advocacy, particularly around students who have learning differences and need to have universal design in the way that they are assisted so that they can lead full and productive lives. I would also like to say we didn't talk much about the Green New Deal, but I think there is a lot of agreement between Kennedy and Markey around the goals of the Green New Deal, and that may be why that didn't get as much into the discussion. Towards the end here, we've had a good conversation on healthcare justice. Some of the other issues like economic justice were not touched on as much during the debate, but there was a general recognition by both candidates that what COVID has done more than anything is reveal the inequalities in society in ways that we absolutely cannot ignore. And so when you're making your choice to go to the poll, you may say, my primary issue that I'm going to make a decision on is education justice, or I am most concerned about criminal justice. I think in either candidate, we are going to have a strong representative for Massachusetts, and that I find very encouraging. I also want to encourage you with Michelle Obama's comments last night at the Democratic National Convention when she said, really what our job is this year is vote. And either get your mail-in ballot early, mark it and get it in the mail as soon as possible so that we can increase the probability that it arrives in time to be counted. And also, you remember she jokingly said we should put on our comfortable shoes and get out our masks and pack a snack and be prepared to wait, because it's too important an election this year. We can't stay home like so many people made the choice to do in 2016. So as we close this evening, get up, take a break, walk around, get a snack, and come back to the TV and let's watch the Democratic National Convention tonight. Bill Clinton will be speaking, and the highlight speaker of the evening is Dr. Jill Biden. I know she will have a lot of exciting things to say. I'm looking forward to her comments on education because she works as a faculty member in a community college system. And so I'm sure she's going to say a lot and expand on the ideas that we've discussed this evening in relation to education justice. On behalf of the McCormick Graduate School at the University of Massachusetts in Boston and our other sponsors, the Boston Globe and WBUR, thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you for caring enough to stay for this extended conversation. Lots of provocative ideas. Hopefully it will help each of you to make a good decision when you go to the polls and vote in the primary on September 1st. Either go in person, or if you have a mail-in ballot, get it in the mail. Hey, thank you very much and have a good evening.